thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me and with TMN Network, and also thank you for the movies, thank you for the stories that you are telling. I think that are absolutely transcendental. We do a lot of education work, especially media literacy, and I think that today you may know that it's more than transcendental to um, you know have a different vision on all how things are shifting. I would like to start asking you, when do you think that was the first time that you thought yourself that I had to make a movie about violence and how these things are portrayed by women filmmakers and non-binary filmmakers? What was the first thing that did that click in your mind?
So I mean, I wanted to make a film about women directors, and I was kind of looking for an angle to, get them in front of the camera and start a dialogue with them. And of course, there are things out there like, discussions around the female gaze and all of that, but that seemed also a little bit predictable and maybe not interesting enough. And so I kind of remembered in the back of my mind that when I did an interview with Kira Muratova, the Ukrainian filmmaker, a couple of years ago, she said something about feminist filmmaking that was like provocative and interesting. And I couldn't quite remember what it was, so I went back to the interview to look for the statement she gave. And when I reread it after all these years, it hit me that it would be actually super interesting, because it seemed like so unexpected, and also in a way I wasn't sure if she was right. I thought this is like edgy, and interesting, but probably she's not right, because probably I would have thought of this before, or would have heard of this, thesis or hypothesis before. So I mean, I was sort of half convinced this would be amazing, but on the other hand, I was like, this is probably too edgy, and the commissioning editor will never accept it. But I suggested it to my commissioning editor, and for some miraculous reason, she loved it right away, and so yeah, it became a film.
Wow. Yeah, I think that is an amazing, when I first watched the movie, it's like you really don't expect that gaze on let's portray violence, especially because right now, especially in the United States, I know, you've been here in New York and, doing some study, and here is everything about, show, spectacle, right? How you would say that this is very, not transformational, but a different gaze that can give that shift in violence portrayed as a spectacle, right? As an act of entertainment. What women and non-binary filmmakers really have that can make that shift possible? You say it on the documentary, but for people that it is they watch the documentary, yet what you can advance for the audience, what makes that possible?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say it's not really about violence. It's like, we have to step back and think of this term like harshness, because it is ambivalent. It's not quite sure what Kira Muratova meant by saying, they make the harsher films. And my first thought was also like violence. She meant violence. And of course, there is a connection to violence in films by women and non-binary directors that has to do with anger and rage, being sort of minorities, or being, or living, in a world that is structured by patriarchy. So, of course, there is a connection there. But then when we think about harshness, it is actually broader, and a broader term and a broader perspective on women's and non-binary filmmaker cinema. And it has to do, I think, with honesty. Actually, they're talking, the fantasy woman, as Jane Campion once said, is missing. They're talking about their lives in a very honest and blunt way, and that makes them appear harsh. So, so that's what is very interesting.
Very interesting. And then going back a little bit in your career, your first film, feature film, the documentary Artificial Intelligence, we didn't expect in 2019 that few years later, right, after the pandemic, would come the thing with especially generative AI and all the things that are happening right now. So I guess that you have a very like a perception to see the things that are coming in advance. Do you believe, and I don't know if I'm advancing too much, that this could represent as well some sort of, okay, this is how culture and how we are facing and the role of women and non-binary filmmakers. Is this an advance in what is coming for the next years on film? What do you think about that? What is too predictable?
Yeah, in a way, I think I was ahead of my time a little bit as well, but it took quite a long time to make this film. So because financing took a long time. So I started working on it actually during the pandemic. So it was like 2019, I think. And I was already working on it for like 2 years or so when Titan came out and won the Golden Palm Tree in Cannes. By Julia Ducournau, and that just really seemed to reaffirm what I was talking about in a way. So I think we were, the movie was like right there when things were happening and becoming more apparent in a way. But then actually, like what happened in the past year or so is that we're also experiencing a backlash that these stories, again, about gender and, emancipation and women's rights and, non-binary trans rights and so on, they are actually being rolled back. And so it's a bizarre cultural moment where I'm not really sure yet how this is going to affect the way the movie's being perceived, because it's still very fresh. I mean, Dark New York City now is one of the first festivals it's going to. So I'm very curious, actually, about the whole cultural atmosphere the movie is being situated in right now and the kind of feedback I'm going to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you that we are in the middle of something that is not really defined yet, especially with all the things that are happening in the United States. And going back or focusing in the cultural differences, right? What do you think that is the common ground in between all these women and non-binary and all, these collectives that were marginalized for so long? But what is in the different cultures? The filmmaker from Ukraine, Soviet Union, different, totally, cultural aspect and ways of submission, etc., etc. With culture more like a pro-democracy like the United States, right? What do you think that is the common ground? Because it's like despite access to, different sort of opinions, etc., we still see that domination, no? Or that form of manipulation in the narrative. What do you think is that common ground between these collectives in the terms of how, are portraying these topics?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, patriarchy is universal in a way. So I think that, there's hardly a country in the world where women are like in a completely equal position these days, actually regarding, for example, violence against women, we are seeing the numbers are going up again. So for some reason, it's actually, in some ways it's getting worse. In some ways it's getting better. And in other ways it's getting worse. And so I think there is actually something that unites these women, even though they have very different opinions on many topics, and that's what's also great about the whole dialogue that's being constructed in the editing, is that, we don't have to, say the same thing all the time to be, united in something else. Like we can be, very diverse and, there's different views on many things, but there's also a lot of things we share, I think, and to experience that, to be able to disagree and also to share some things at the same time, that's also a good thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yes, again, we are in a time and talking about a little bit, what we focus the most, and for me as an educator, 20 years, I said as a filmmaker, also try to do some documentaries or whatever I try to, but especially I focus more in education because I think that media literacy was something that always was lacking in schools, right? Especially, in the 80s and the film class with an optional thing, not a mandatory thing that you had to learn to that class, in that class, know how to read images, right? And all these sort of narratives, right? Right now, we are seeing a change again in this shifting, and especially in the short form videos and the social media and the access that young people is having to these tools. And I see, talking with many educators, they are super scared about all these sort of things, and the lack of media literacy, etc. I, for my part, see that this is an incredible opportunity. From your perspective as a women filmmaker with all this experience, what do you think that are the tools that we can leverage to really start making media literacy something that, with films, for example, like this, right, that you are making, that can really be transformative in the meaning of how we read images?
Mm-hmm. With this film, you mean, with No Mercy?
With this film, and also in your work in general, and also in the from the gender perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, sort of going against cliches is always important, and that's what I'm usually interested in as a filmmaker. Our topics where things aren't 100% clear. I'm not so interested in sort of a black and white kind of storytelling, even though I consider myself to be political, and also some of my films, they have a political or a socially aware sort of attitude, yet I try to weave it into poeticness, because I think what is a poetic image, or what is a poetic film? It's something that is not 100% decipherable, maybe, that is something that stays a little bit mysterious, maybe, that you want to keep looking at and staring at, because you cannot grasp it maybe 100% right away. So I think these are things that art gives us. These are tools or methods or ways of thinking and experience, and we get from cinematography, from the art of filmmaking and art in general. And these are the ways I also want to work with, because I don't think I'm a teacher. I don't want to educate people like, now you have to think this and this and this and this. This is not what I think is sort of most valuable to me. For me, it is more valuable to get people into a process of thinking and experiencing, and this is by itself a valuable process that people, they are, trying to grasp, trying to understand something, having to make up their own minds. You don't feed it to them so easily, so they have a whole experience in the movie theater, or in front of a screen. So I think it's so that is my stand, even though I do have my messages also, right? But I don't want to give it to them too easily, because for me it's much better you make up your mind yourself. I want to put a little bit of my thoughts into your mind as well, but please do think for yourself mostly. And then we've gained a lot, actually, think, as a whole culture, because then we have then are aware spectators, are people that have awareness and have a reflective and open mind, and I think that is sort of the most valuable thing we can have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is super interesting, and I 100% agree with you. From my perspective, for example, as an educator, is I all my whole life hate not teachers, but the word teachers, like a classroom. I think that, 4 walls, or the person that tell you how you, that is a very typical also from the American cinema, no? You have to feel this moment, in this particular moment, this way, right? So it is especially here in an American culture, if you see young people, it's like a very, they are constantly manipulated somehow, right, by the media, by the movies, etc., right? So I agree 100% with that. And also, as a last question, no message, because I also don't like the word message, or the word I believe in mentorship. I believe that when you have someone on your side that is opening you the doors to the questions that you have to answer yourself, it's much more effective, right? As you say, what do you think young people have in this moment, right? And based on your experience, they really have to unlearn from the system how have been educated for this last century, in order to become a more critical thinkers and start creating movies from a perspective more critical than using moving images just for the sake of entertainment.
Okay, could you rephrase the question, please?
Yes, I would say, what do you think that are the things that young people or even adults we have to unlearn? What do we have to try to forget of this system that is pushing with image constantly for a century now?
Yeah,
what is the clip that can say, okay, there is always, a clip that's shift your perspective on something. What would you say that is that?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. I'm not sure about unlearning, but it's like we have to, I think almost all of us, we have to, we have a problem with our attention span, because we're, on the internet and social media, we're used to seeing super short clips, and you don't really give things time anymore, in this world, and you don't give thought processes time anymore. And I think these are things that are actually super valuable to immerse yourself into something deeply, and that usually takes a little bit of time. It's not being done in 30 seconds. So I think that is something that has gotten lost, and that we sort of as a culture should fight for, learning again, relearning it. Immersing ourselves in books, for example. And it's very hard for most of us who used to read novels. Nowadays it's super hard to concentrate on a novel. And the same with feature films that are not super narrative, character driven, your hero's journey, the usual structure that just pulls you in, that are more complex maybe. So I think this is something that we should fight for as a culture to for our own attention, and to for things that are in depth and that we immerse ourselves in.
Very interesting. Well, I have to say, just from my perspective, your documentary is, I think the montage is something that it is a central, a role in your work. From where you take these ideas of how can we make, because it is kind of like for many Americans, watch documentaries is something complicated, right? They expect the answers. They don't expect people asking questions. But it's seems to me you got very well that balance in between something that can be kind, the use of music and the montage. That is something that engage you in the story, but without being entertainment, right? So what do you think that what made you put in that role, and from where do you take your ideas to create those sort of narratives?
I think a lot of it comes actually, from being interested in art. Like, for example, when I made High Eye, the movie you mentioned before about artificial intelligence and humanoid robots, my inspiration back then, my first inspiration was actually surrealist art and the love of puppets and dolls they had back then. And so, so you have sort of certain associations, and often they do come from the world of art for me, but also then the real world, because the issues I'm interested in are burning issues, and so the two come together in a way. Like I have to know that something is like a burning topic somehow, and burning also in myself, and on the other hand, it needs to have that sort of visual quality, that sort of the possibility to play with it in some way, to make it something aesthetic, like to create an aesthetic experience. And if these two come together, then I'm all in for it, kind of.
Yeah, I love it. But I love also your music taste. I think that is incredible. I'm a music fan, and I really enjoy the movie, and the narrative and how it's told. It is incredible. Isa, thank you so much for this conversation. We wish you the best here at the Docs in New York City and in all the tours with the movie. Is there anything else that you would like to add regarding the movie or your experience?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching No Mercy, and for your kind words and your your attention and your yeah, just the way you paid attention to certain aspects and details of it, and that you appreciated the work we put into it, and that is really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.